Greetings, Gary again from Future Australian Impact Foundation. Today's podcast, we seek to challenge the traditional role of trustees within charities and not-for-profits. I believe that there is a disconnect between the original intention of a trustee and the current position. In dealing with many of the major trustees around the country, primarily institutions, we find that the amount of money being held for philanthropic charitable purposes exceeds our annual capital raising, which we know in Australia is around $14 billion. Obviously, we're all intending within the sector to find ways in which we can double the philanthropy by 2030. We all strongly support that initiative, and we believe that one of the areas that we can increase and improve dramatically is to revisit the traditional role of the trustee and their current functions in managing capital on behalf of charities and not-for-profits. So it's debatable, of course, what's an ideal scenario, but I've found that in my discussions with many of the major charities and many smaller ones across Australia over the last 12 months that the trustees have adopted an institutional and corporate approach to their role and their fiduciary responsibility. And as an example, we end up accumulating capital. We know that the first thing that anyone goes onto a board, onto a not-for-profit or charity, and quite clearly looks at what the sustainability of that charity would be. So, of course, inevitably, as a responsible person, a trustee would look at something like compliance, of course, and solvency, and of course those two are given. And once those two are in place, then I've seen that many of the major charities now then thereafter effectively become fund managers. So this must be under the guise of and under the guidance of the trustees. And we've come across charities with 10, 15, 20, and even 30 years worth of their current overhead held in investments. And we would like to challenge that. We believe that that's not the intention. A trustee's main mission outside of solvency and sustainability and guidance and, of course, compliance should be to maximize and absolutely optimize the impact. The original intention of that mission is to set up and to help as many people in whatever that nominated charity is and whatever that speciality is. So a key part of galvanizing and having much more capital flow into the philanthropic sector is to challenge the current role of the trustees. So trustees have become fund managers. I've had multiple meetings, and we're aware of course, coming out of financial services and funds management over the last few decades, we're aware that some of our big institutions, all wonderful institutions with great intent, hold billions and billions and billions of dollars that have been donated by ordinary Australians in many cases over a long period of time with the intention of helping people or whatever the charity is. It might be cats and dogs, might be oceans, it might be whatever that may be. The reality of it is that the funds are meant to be deployed in the most effective and sustainable manner possible. And sustainability doesn't necessarily translate to building up as much capital as possible. The guidelines around trustees, interestingly, just through a normal AI exploration and some research in the market, suggests about 5 years. And that's not to say, of course, in some of the very big bequests and some of the very big family offices, of course, who are not in the capital raising business. They do wonderful work in philanthropy and are absolutely critical. The reality of it is that many of our core charities simply build capital way beyond what we believe their mission should be and their role should be. So we deal with charities that believe that their role as trustees is to simply create diversification, all the normal, dare I say, standard wording and actions around running portfolios, investment portfolios. So I've heard a lot about diversification, etc. But surprisingly and interestingly to me is that a lot of the funds are in equities. We know that that introduces market risk. And of course, the long-term funds, that may well make sense. But in the short term, for charities that are barely in survival mode, to have part of their corpus or their capital invested in anything other than capital protected assets or investments, we do not believe is prudent. As I say, as an estimate, just having had meetings with 4 of the 6 biggest trustees and just guesstimated in some cases some of the capital that's held, and then had quite a lot of engagement with some of the biggest charities where we've got hundreds of millions of dollars, and in some cases, certainly in terms of the institutions, billions and billions of dollars that are simply being run like portfolios. And again, that's our challenge. We don't believe that that should be the case at all. Why would you possibly, as a trustee, why would you possibly be keeping, 10 years of your current overheads within a charity? Why would you keep 10 years with it? I don't think anyone donates today thinking that the money is going to go into an investment portfolio for someone else, a third party, albeit a responsible, institutional, experienced business champion, is going to then invest the money for the next 10 years or the next 15 years. I would argue strongly that the vast majority of donors give money seeking to help whatever their chosen charity is. They want immediate impact or as close to that as possible. They want it to be tangible. They want to see the result of their giving. And I believe that certainly applies all the way up the giving tree, right up to the very largest of our philanthropists. I think the deployment of capital is really essential, and the maximizing and optimization of actual every dollar that comes in is meant to go and help people or whatever the specific charity is. I don't believe it's meant to become an investment portfolio. So at the risk of repeating myself, that's a challenge to the trustees. One of our future podcasts will deal with far more detail than I'm going into today. But I believe that there is a very real and urgent need to revisit the role of the trustees, to ensure that, to find more sustainable models. A simple financial model that we've introduced for new capital raising actual models would include fixed income, fixed period, where capital regenerates on a known basis, whilst releasing significant amount of investment capital to the charity itself. At the end of the day, each charity should be looking to help as many people as possible, or whatever the outcome is that they're working towards, in the shortest space of time. And keeping capital for deployment in 15 years' time, I believe is contrary to mission and contrary to the role of the trustee. We welcome any challenge around that and engagement, and look forward to the release of far more existing known capital into the charitable and philanthropic sector. And I guess in summary, if full transparency existed in every charity to every donor as to what was actually being held, I would argue that a significant amount of donors would not want to give to their charity if they knew that they already had more than 10 years or 5 years even, certainly more than 5 years of capital that was just simply being invested for some time in the future. The simple cost of money and the devaluation of money over a period really devalues the impact that can have. And the need is now. The need is not for 10 years' time and 15 years' time. No doubt there'll be an even bigger need then. But the reality of it is that the need is now, and to have money in bank accounts and in equity markets and all sorts of other assets, because that effectively suits and I would even argue protects the trustees and the charity, as opposed to making the major impact or the largest possible impact that you can within the charity, which ultimately we would argue is the mission. So we wish you well, and thank you for listening.